is Kevin Fitzpatrick. I am the shepherd, which, if you know your lamb's lingo, is the president of the club. Who's here for the first time? Anybody here for the first time? Well, welcome. Well, we have some distinguished visitors from the rehearsal club. I'll tell you about in just a second. So you're here at a really great time. This is our sesquicentennial. Now, that's a big word. What's it mean? How many years is sesquicentennial? The writers don't really know that. 150, very good, right? 150, so 150th anniversary. So we started in 1874. We're the oldest professional theatrical organization, so we have a lot to celebrate this year. If you want to come back next week, a week from tonight, we're celebrating Lamb James Montgomery Flagg's birthday. Everybody knows who he is, right?
Yes.
What's his most famous painting?
Uncle Sam.
Uncle Sam, I Want You. Yes, so he was a lamb, as was Howard Chandler Christie, whose art is on that side of the wall over there. And so next Thursday, a week from tonight, we're having a party for him, and we're unveiling 7 paintings that the Lamb's collection, Lamb's Foundation, is restoring. And so we have those here with some experts to talk about the paintings and the history, including 3 James Montgomery Flagg nudes. Because in the old days, we would have a big party called the Lamb's Gambol, and those paintings of the nudes were the playbill covers. And so we're having 3 of those restored from the 1930s, and we're having another Gambol in December of this year. And it's kind of funny, before we booked the Lambs to write the show, we had the volunteers who wanted to paint on the cover of the playbill. So just stay tuned for her and that painting to be coming out later this year. But we've had a really successful run of author talks this year, so it's really great to have Paul with us tonight. And we also have some special guests because we are going to be talking Billie Holliday. We do have 2 members of the Rehearsal Club. The Rehearsal Club is still in business, still doing very well. There's quite a few members, and they've come here a few times. So we have Francine Mancini performing tonight, as well as Karina Pamalis as well too. So we're getting a taste of Billie as well. Billie, not a member of the Lambs. We did not admit women until 1974. Actually, it's a little bit dark, but that painting right there is the first woman to join the club. That is Cornelia Otis Skinner. We ended gender discrimination 50 years ago this year. It was Lambs who admitted women many years before those other clubs downtown did. And so we're very proud of that fact. And so that's another thing that we're celebrating this year. But let me turn it over to our Lamb of the Night. Please welcome Mr. Foster Hirsch.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. It is my pleasure to introduce a distinguished author, biographer, Paul Alexander, who's going to be talking about his terrific new book. Please welcome Paul. I think we're sharing this microphone, is that right?
No, this-
There's one mic.
No, there's 2.
There are 2?
Yeah, let me give you.
Where's the other?
Right here.
There we go, thank you. Hello. Yes.
Okay, now you are a biographer, and you have written biographies of 3 extraordinary personalities: Sylvia Plath, J.D. Salinger,
Yes.
and Billie Holliday.
Yes.
Now, do they have anything in common?
Do they have anything in common?
I couldn't at first pick out what they might have in common, but was there something that drew you to each one, and is there a common factor
I
in that
think
choice?
probably what has attracted to me, and it's true in sort of anything, anybody I write about or any subject I write about, I have to be really distinctly interested in that person. And I would argue that Plath is the consummate artist in the literary field. J.D. Salinger was kind of one of her inspirations, so he would fall into that. You left out James Dean, consummate artist in the film world, and Billie, of course, in my opinion, there's no better jazz singer in the 20th century. So I think the level of quality of their work, they're the consummate artists in their field. And I think that's probably what has drawn me to the subjects, the people that I've written about.
But is it fair to say they were all troubled people?
Yes, yes, in varying degrees. and the dysfunction worked itself out in different ways. You know, Sylvia obviously had, severe emotional problems. Who knows what was going on with Salinger? He was such an odd character. But, and then James Dean was not really ever old enough to have figured out what was up with him because he died at 24.
But there was plenty wrong.
But there was plenty wrong with a lot, and that my book really gets in this is sexual dysfunction because he was really a gay man who couldn't come out at that time. So there was a lot of conflict over that he dealt with. Also coming from Indiana, a very conservative religious background and all. And with Billie, she died of alcoholism. She had substance abuse problems, particularly heroin, And so, why was that? Well, if you look at the childhood, and that explains a lot with her. She had a horrible childhood. A mother who wasn't there, a father who never really took any ownership of her at all until she became famous. And then he was, everybody was suddenly related to her then. I thought it was interesting. It wasn't until she was put into reform school that she had any kind of order in her life, because it was just so chaotic. She dropped out in the 5th grade. So that's sort of all that trauma that she lived through when he was young, raped at a young age, became a teenage prostitute. So all of that sort of built up, and that I think ultimately produced the emotional problems that she sort of masked with the drugs and the alcohol.
For all 4 of these figures, you had no opportunity to meet them. Salinger was alive while you were writing.
I had, how do you put this? I saw Salinger, but I never talked to Salinger. And I would talk to people who did talk to Salinger. So I knew what his thinking was. For example, I knew what he thought about the book when it came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I had a go-between at the Gotham Bookmark, and the book came out, and we didn't get a lawsuit. There was no letter. And so I went into the bookmark and got my friend, and I said, "Where's the lawsuit?" We were kind of counting on the letter. Where? He said, "Oh, he likes your book." So I thought that was a compliment.
And he didn't try to stop it?
He never tried to stop the book, nor did he sue me. He liked the book. And then years later, it was made into a documentary that's currently on HBO, but it's on American Masters and Netflix. And the filmmaker who made it, he was shooting up in New Hampshire, and they were getting near the end of their shoot. And he had worked on this film for 10 years. I mean, he really paid for it himself. And they're getting ready to wrap up, and one day, a phone call came in and said, you should be in the parking lot at a particular grocery store on Friday at a certain time. So they went, rushing over to the parking lot in the grocery, and Salinger pulled up and got out so they could film him going into the grocery store.
That was as close as he allowed them to get?
Yeah, but he knew all about what they were doing. That was the thing about Salinger. He wanted to create this image that he didn't know what was going on. He was hiding in the shadows. He knew everything that was going on.
Well, he was very controlling.
Very controlling, and he knew how to manipulate the press. He was a genius at it. And he did give interviews. He gave an interview to the New York Times at one point because he wanted a certain pop of publicity about something, and he knew the moment that he called the reporter and talked to her on the phone, it'd be on the front page of the New York Times, and it was. So this whole thing about Salinger, he knew exactly, it was a shtick. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it for book sales.
He was the most in control of your personality?
Yes.
Would you say?
By far.
By far?
By far.
By far, it had the longest life.
Right.
Would you say, and I suppose this is one of the through lines of your book, would you say that Billie Holiday did exact a certain amount of control over her life finally, or was she a victim of her addictions and weaknesses?
Well, I think that she controlled the addictions and the weaknesses as best she could. What she ultimately could not control, because honest to God, no one in this room could control the federal government. We just can't. And when they decided to target her and to go after her, that was the end of the story. Because you don't fight the federal government and win.
And she could not, your book tells us she could not perform in cabaret in New York,
No.
and it took away a lot of the income that she counted
Oh
on.
yeah, that's why she had money troubles the last, part of her life. When she came out of prison in '47, you had to have a cabaret card. This is back in the day. It was issued by the New York Police Department in conjunction with the mayor's office. And so, every year, 300-400 cabaret cards would be issued. It wasn't like a special thing. If you worked in a cabaret and you were like a busboy, you had to have a cabaret card. But anyone working in a venue that sold alcohol, particularly if you were an entertainer, you had to have a cabaret card. Well, there was a rule: if you had a felony conviction, you couldn't have a cabaret card. Did they make exceptions to that rule? Yes, they did all the time.
But not for Billie
Would
Holiday.
they make the exception for Billie? No,
And they never did.
never did.
Did she feel persecuted?
Of course, absolutely.
And she was persecuted.
She was persecuted. Norman Mailer used to say, "You're not paranoid if they really are after you."
They were after her.
They were after her. She was not paranoid. They were really after her.
Were they after her because she was black?
Yes.
There was
Yeah,
racism.
this silly movie that Lee Daniels directed called United States versus Billie Holiday. Not a single scene in it is true, so don't watch that film. But the premise of that film is that they were after her because she wouldn't stop singing Strange Fruit. Well, that's a minor thing. They wouldn't stop going after her because she was a powerful black woman in the middle of the Jim Crow era. And she had to be, as Annie Ross said to me, she had to be put in her place, brought down a notch. She was too well known, too powerful, she had too big of an audience. And so was Strange Fruit a part of that? Well, yeah, it's part of the reason why she was so famous, because of that song. But no government official ever came and said, "You got to stop singing this song." Now, theater owners did all the time. Were they pressured by the FBI? Probably. But it was much more subtle than this silly film that he's
But
made.
given all the pressures on her and the financial challenges,
Right.
at the end of her life, and your book is about the last year of her
Right.
life,
Right.
cleverly, and we'll talk about it in a minute, it's much more than that.
It's
But
more.
in the last year of her life, you would say she did conquer her addictions?
She never conquered the alcoholism. Ever. Ever. No, she started when, I don't know, probably she was 12. She started drinking, smoking, and dabbling with drugs. And because she got her break playing the two different bordellos in Baltimore, where she grew up. And so while she was working in these places, she started doing what everybody else was doing, drinking, smoking, that sort of thing. And she did have a very serious heroin addiction in the mid-40s, right after she had had a really violent affair with John Simmons. And she became addicted. She couldn't get off. They ended up busting her. She went to prison for a year, where obviously she didn't do drugs. And then after that, when she came out, she was, Hazel Scott described it. Her best friend was probably Hazel Scott, like sisters. She described it in one of the magazines. She would dabble in drugs. She was a recreational drug user, like so many people in the country are recreational drug. But was she ever addicted to heroin like she was in the 40s? No. So did she dabble? Yes, and she dabbled in the last year of her life. She and Annie Ross were dabbling because Annie had a heroin problem. In fact, probably Annie's heroin problem was what influenced Billie at that point, because Billie didn't have the money to buy heroin.
But is it true, and critics have said this, that the years of drug taking and alcohol did have a negative effect on her voice? And as I was
Yes.
preparing for tonight and listening to Billie Holiday, and of
Yeah.
course she was extraordinary. I want to talk about her artistry, that's why we're
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
But the voice changes over time.
Very
Billie
much so.
Holiday in the 30s and the 40s is not
Very.
the same voice as Billie Holiday in the last decade of her life.
Right, and
her
particularly it's, in my opinion, it's best captured on Lady in Satin, which she recorded in February of '58. She died in July of '59. So it was literally at the end of her life. And you can hear the pain, the damage that's been done.
But doesn't that add, in a sense,
To me it
the
does.
authenticity of the performance?
I think it's her best album. I think it's a masterpiece.
Though her voice is not in its greatest shape.
No, nowhere near like the pure voice, particularly of the Teddy Wilson years or the middle years when she did, Lady Sings the Blues and those albums.
But the voice still had, what it had was this enormous emotion. You could
You
feel, she could say lyrics with a great subtext.
Right.
I'm just surprised she didn't have an acting career, because as a singer, she's a great actress.
Well, I think she's a method singer.
I was just gonna say.
I think she's method.
Like Judy Garland, was
Like
a
Judy
great
Garland.
method singer.
She was a method singer. And, this was the time of the actor studio, when it was really coming up and becoming a force in the industry. And I think she was, because she knew, not that she knew, that's what she did, was convey the emotion that she was feeling in the song, so that if you were in the audience, you felt like you felt the same thing.
And so as her life became almost increasingly painful, that fed immediately
Absolutely.
into the singing.
Absolutely.
And you could feel the depth of pain that this woman had.
Right.
And it enhanced her art.
And
her voice was very ragged.
It was very ragged, but every song on that record is about loss, disappointment, abandonment, and you can just feel the pain that's in the voice that is in each of those songs.
I listened to Strange Fruit, which is hypnotic and powerful in many different iterations over
Right.
many different years.
Right.
Nobody will ever be able to touch her delivery of that song in any of her decades.
No, and she's the definitive, and will always be the definitive singer on that song. She recorded it in 1939 for the first time, and it's a beautiful melodic version, with orchestrations, and her voice was so sweet at that point. There's such a sweet quality to it. Now, of course, what she's singing about made the whole thing bitterly ironic. Then she re-recorded it in the mid-50s for the Lady Sings the Blues album. And that version is a little more strident, less youngish, which is what you get with the early version. And then the last song she ever sang on television was Strange Fruit. And it was for a British variety television show in February of '59. And for that one, there was no music. It was just Mal Waldron backing her up on the piano. And it's a brutal thing to watch. You can watch it on YouTube, go home and Google.
You feel the entire history of lynching in America in that song.
In that song.
In that song.
With particularly the way she sings it. And I've done lectures, obviously, since February on Billie. And at one, I played the early version and then the later version, and it's just stunning how much difference those two versions of the same song are, because she herself has grown so much and been through so much.
But the early and late versions evoke the enormous racial pain
Right.
behind and beneath the lyrics. You feel that at any point
Right.
that she sings the song.
For
Whatever
me-
the condition of her voice.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
Didn't matter.
And for me, the last version shows, the early version she's singing about the other people who had been lynched. The last version she's singing about herself who has been lynched. And I remember the Wall Street Journal review said, my title is in bad taste because I used the word bitter crop, which is about the victims in the song. I'm going, well, that's who Billie was. The government killed her. I mean, that's what happened. And so that last version that's on YouTube is the one, for me at least, is the most accurate version for what she could get out of that song and convey to an audience.
That took a lifetime to get
Took a
there.
lifetime to
It
get
took
there.
a lifetime to get there. You say in the book that she's been inaccurately described as a blues singer.
She's
And
not a
she
blues
is not a
singer.
blues singer.
No.
She is a jazz singer.
Well, she's herself called herself a song stylist. That's how it, because people ask her this question in almost every interview. Are you a blues singer or are you a jazz singer? Her answer would be, I'm a song stylist. However, the historians can say, yeah, she's a jazz singer. And she's, in my opinion, the best jazz singer of the 20th century.
What does that mean as opposed to a blues singer? For those of us who are not musically informed.
How do you describe the difference between blues and jazz? There's a darker, more melodic quality to blues, and you're singing about, my man done left me, and it's a more guttural feel to the music. And Billie could do that. She wrote 2 great blues tunes, but she really only recorded 8 or 9 blues songs in her whole career. She's recorded over 300 songs, and only about 8 or 9 would be considered blues songs. Jazz is more, the tempo is more upbeat, the color of the song is more upbeat, and it's less of a meditation on what bad thing that has happened to you. And so even if it's a negative song about, your boyfriend leaving you or your husband leaving, whatever, your lover leaving you, it doesn't have the same emotional feel to it that a blues song does. Although her great influence was Bessie Smith, who's like the master of the blues.
But does jazz imply a certain amount of improvisation?
Yes.
And did Billie change?
Yes. No song was ever the same.
Never the same.
No.
So she improvised
All the time.
from one performance to another.
Right, all the time, and she would do it in various ways. She's known for singing behind the beat. She never sang on the beat. She sang behind the beat. So sometimes she would vary how she did it, and singing behind the beat. And she also rarely ever followed the actual melody of the song. She would do the melody of the song that she wanted to do. And it was kind of, now the band's playing the actual melody.
She's singing
They're
against
following
that.
the notes, and she's singing against that.
Against
So it creates this dichotomy in the performance where she's just, no one could sing like her. No one could do that. She had a perfect pitch. She had perfect beat. She may have been singing behind the beat, but she was exactly on beat behind the beat.
Did she get along with her bands?
Oh, the
They loved her?
musicians loved her.
They loved her.
Loved her. They worshipped her. I make this point when she came in to record the next to her last album, Lady in Satin. Ray Ellis introduced her because she had a 35-piece band for this one. And they all broke out in applause, and he points out at one point, they don't always do that for the singer, because some of them are difficult to work with.
But she was not.
The musicians loved her.
And she had superb taste in who played for
Not
her.
the best. I mean, the
Superb
best.
taste.
Yeah, the best of that generation played
Now,
for her.
You tell us that she was not in any way musically trained. Is that
No,
true?
none. Uh-uh.
Could she read music?
Uh-uh. No, she could not read music. She could not write music. She was basically musically illiterate, we would say. So she would have to learn a song, but when she learned the song, she had it. And then she would learn it the way it was written, and then she would start playing with it. So, and she often did the same songs over and over again in her acts. So once she got the song down, then that's when she started experimenting with the song.
But her attraction to music was instinctive and
Instinctive.
inborn?
12 years old.
At 12?
Yeah. She was working in a bordello in Fells Point, neighborhood of Baltimore. And this particular house had a gramophone. And so she was able to start playing Louis Armstrong and Bessie Smith records. And those would become the two main influences on her career. She became friends with Louis Armstrong, so that was one odd thing about her life. She became friends with her mentor, which does not always happen.
But it was something, her being drawn to music was something
Natural.
instinctive. Nobody pushed her there.
Totally natural.
Just
yeah.
natural.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't think the family really, her mother was never around, her father, like I said, the father was never with the mother. The father had a brief fling with the mother, and that was it. He never married her, and even though if you read Billie's autobiography, she describes their family life and everything else.
But you tell us that her so-called autobiography
About half
is
of
a
it is
work
made up.
of great fiction.
Great fiction, yeah.
Very imaginative.
Very imaginative. Clarence Holliday was not around. And then, of course, she became famous, and then he was around more. But it was just, so the family didn't push her, no individual person pushed her. It was like she was drawn like a moth to a light, to the music.
I was interested in your subtitle, Bitter Crop, the triumph and tragedy of Billie Holiday's last year.
Last year.
I got more tragedy than triumph.
Well, there probably is more tragedy than triumph, but in that last year, she recorded her masterpiece. She played some gigs which were among the best, like the Academy of Music in Philadelphia. She played that venue for the first time, and that was a big deal for her, because she really loved playing, the venue, the Carnegie Halls and those kind of places, because let's face it, they only played people who were accepted in the music world. And so the Academy of Music, Edith Piaf had played there, and famous opera singers. So the fact that she got to sing that venue was a big deal to her. And so she had moments like that in the last year of her life.
But you also described moments in her apartment, or a lot of moments,
Right.
where she seemed terribly
Lonely.
isolated and
lonely, very lonely.
Terribly lonely
Right.
woman.
And she always had a fear of loneliness in her life. That's why she stayed married to these awful men, that she should have divorced long before, or ran them off, because she only married 2 of them. Even though she said she had 4 husbands, she only had 2.
But I would submit that one of her problems with her husbands is that she was probably by inclination a lesbian.
I think she was. I kind of make this point very much in passing in the book, because the 2 affairs in her life that were most successful were both with women.
And tell the audience you'll be very surprised at who one of them was with, or maybe you won't be surprised.
Well, the first one was with Louise Crane. So people go, well, who was Louise Crane?
Crane paper.
She was the heiress to the Crane paper fortune, which still has the government contract to produce paper. So everybody in the audience has Crane paper, and because they do the currency. So this woman that she was involved with was clearly wealthy, and those 2 became involved. Well, Louise pursued her when Billie was headlining at Cafe Society. And Louise was instrumental in buying her early evening gowns and mink coats, and she really helped her create what became the Billie Holiday look. And so Louise was very much behind that. But then when it became clear to her wealthy family that something fishy was going on, the mother made them break up. And so John Hammond was involved in that too. The man who supposedly discovered Billie and was a cousin to Louise Crane. And so that ended. She never really got over it. She was bitter about that for years. And then right after she got out of prison, she became involved with Tallulah Bankhead. And that went on until like 1951, so like 4 years. They had known each other going all the way back to the 30s, but then they really became involved after she got out of prison.
But you write that Tallulah Bankhead or her agents were uncomfortable with this relationship? I wouldn't have thought Tallulah would care about that.
No, I think Tallulah was the problem. I think as she became more and more involved with Billie, particularly after she had her own scandal, where one of her employees had stolen money and she had gone after the employee, and then she realized, oh wait, the employee knows too much, and there was a trial. She was afraid she was going to start talking about all the drugs that she was doing and the women that she was sleeping with. So it was Tallulah who actually ended the relationship with Billie after that trial that happened that became like front page news all over the country.
But then was loyal to her in the end.
Very much so. She came to the, she never saw Billie again after when they broke up, it was around 51. And then when Billie died in 59, and Billie had reached out to her. She tried to put her in her autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues, she tried to put, and Tallulah blocked it. So she did make an effort, and it was very positive. Everything she was going to put was very positive, and you wouldn't have known that they were having a relationship, you know, because she put Orson Welles and other people in it. Although they too had a relationship. But when she died and was laying in state in the funeral home, Tallulah showed up, and there are reports that we have that she went up to the body, because it was an open coffin, and started talking to Billie. She leaned down to her and started talking to her, and I guess they had a conversation in some way, although Billie was
And
dead.
as you describe it in the book, it was a very moving scene.
It was very
actually.
moving.
Yeah, very moving
Yeah.
scene.
And then she did not go to the funeral, but she sent 12 dozen roses to the funeral.
Now, I think we know Billie Holiday through the Diana Ross film, Lady
Yes.
Sings the Blues.
Yes.
How is that on the accuracy barometer?
Well, it's not as bad as the Lee Daniels movie, which doesn't have an accurate scene in the whole film. Not one.
Not one.
Well, the title card at the end that gives her death date is accurate. Everything before that is inaccurate. So, like, she never had an affair with a federal agent who was like stalking her, and they fall in love, and none of that ever happened. You know, was there a Jimmy, what's his name? Of course there was. Jimmy Fletcher, of course there was. But Billie didn't have an affair with him. Was she going to have sleeping with a federal agent? I mean, really, how insulting can you be? This man was involved in putting her in prison, and then they think she's having an affair, and they have this grotesque sex scene where she's having sex with a guy in a motel room. I don't understand that movie at all. It's like, nothing to do with Billie Holiday's life, put it that way. And Andra, what's her name, won a Golden Globe for it, you know. Now, Lady Sings the Blues is not quite as bad, but it's not accurate either. And in fact, the whole Louis McKay character is totally made up. That's not, you know, Billy D. Williams is a great actor and played the part really well, but that was not Louis McKay. That's somebody that they invented for the movie.
Did Diana Ross capture anything of her?
No.
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 She gave a good performance.
Yes, but it was not Billie Holiday.
Billie Holiday.
No, it was like it was the movie before Mahogany is what it was.
Okay.
You know, so she was very good at Mahogany. This was like, I guess, the warm-up, but that's not, she didn't sound like Billie, she didn't sing like Billie. Billie was...
She sounded and sang like Diana Ross.
She sounded like Diana Ross. And it was, you know, Berry Gordy knew what he was doing. They did a 2-album set, 2-record set on that, and it went like #1 on the Billboard charts. That's where he made all the money off that movie, was the record. But it was Diana Ross singing Billie Holiday songs. It wasn't Billie Holiday.
And no attempt to evoke her.
I don't think so. Do you feel any Billie Holiday when you hear Diana Ross sing those songs? I don't.
You hear Diana Ross?
You hear Diana Ross.
Who is a great singer.
Is one of my favorite singers, but she's not Billie Holiday. And there was no way she approached like who she was as a person. It was just that, and all the squealing and all that stuff. When You know, because at the end, that the character, you know, the piano player. In fact, oh, that's what they called him, piano player, piano man, or something. That's an invented character. That person didn't exist in Billie's life. And of course, they kill him off. Richard Pryor played it brilliantly, but that's not a real person. They just made that person up. And that horrible scene at the end where she's screaming and crying over this imagined dead person, that's not the way Billie was. That's not, she was always in control of her emotions.
But it got Diana
Always.
Ross an Oscar nomination.
She got nominated for an
Yes,
Oscar.
yes. Now, how was Audra McDonald in the recent Broadway?
I didn't see it.
Oh, you didn't see it?
No. No, that script is as bad as the Lee Daniels script. Because he uses all the information out of Billie's autobiography, almost none of which is true. So,
But I wonder how Audra McDonald was.
I've seen clips of her singing. She imitates her very well.
She does.
Yeah.
Because she's a superb
Oh,
actress.
there's one. She's one of a kind. I can't wait to see her do Gypsy.
Yeah.
You know, finally. You know,
Yeah, she's a brilliant.
she was like born to play that part.
She's a brilliant performer.
Yes.
There's nothing she can't do.
Nothing.
But I too avoid.
It's the
that.
material. It's the material. I have a real problem with it. But the whole concept of that thing is Billie confessing her life in some place called Emerson's Bar and Grill in the last year of her life. Okay, there is no Emerson's Bar and Grill. She didn't play anything like that during the last year of her life. And Billie never confessed anything to any audience anywhere. She didn't do patter. She did not do patter. No. The most she would ever say is, I hope you like this song. It's something I wrote. And off she would go.
She was not a
To tell a
confessional
story
performer.
about her life, you know, the way like Taylor Swift will stop and tell like long stories about something. Billie never did that. Never. You know, here's a song by the Gershwins, and then she would sing it.
There would have been no play if they didn't have that conceit.
Right, right. So that's fine. That's, you know, that was the conceit of the play, but that's not Billie Holiday. That's some other person that you've invented.
Now, when you do a biography, you are married to your subject
For 4 years
for
in
4
this case.
years. In this case, that's not so long. It could be 10 or 20.
Well, I've been
sometimes.
thinking about doing something on Billie for probably 15 years. And then my agent finally said, why don't you write a book? That's what you do. So I said, if you can sell it, I'll write it. And by God, he sold it. So I wrote it.
Did you like spending time with her?
Enormously. Yeah,
Because
she's
a
a
biographer
fast-
can end up disliking his or
Tell
her
me,
subject.
tell me. And I've read some Billie Holiday biographies where the author clearly ended up hating her by the time the book was done. I had the exact opposite experience. I just found her a complicated, you know, fascinating woman who had and every day was an adventure with her. You just never knew what was going to happen next. You know, and this drive that she had to be creative. You know, Catherine Russell says in the blurb on the back of my book, and she would get it because she's a great singer. You know, what she took from my book, 100,000 Words on Billie Holiday, was that she never lost the drive to sing, ever. That's, if you were looking for one motivating force in her life, that was it. She had to get up in front of people and sing.
And she was not retired in her last year, or
No.
thinking of retirement. She
No.
had gigs coming up.
Absolutely. The last thing she was only 44. So the last thing she ever expected to do was retire. And they tried to get her to slow down in the last year. Her manager, close friends like Leonard Feather, you know, just take a time off, Billie, and recover. Wouldn't do it.
Now, there was a character in the book that I was interested in because I knew him at the end of his life. And you mentioned him briefly, but I think he probably got Billie into a lot of trouble. And that's Barney Josephson, who, after all, had been a communist.
Yes.
And was under investigation. And
Yes.
I think there's some unanswered questions about what he did for the Communist Party.
Well, his brother did a lot for the Communist Party.
And he was
William.
under investigation, and he
Yes.
owned Cafe Society.
Yes.
And
With money probably put up by the Communist Party.
But did that tar Billie at all? Did that?
I think it helped to make her a target You know, when that club opened up, Barney Josephson opened it up. His silent partner was his brother Leon, who was so involved with the Communist Party. He was in that plot to try to kill Hitler, you know, back in the 30s before Hitler was rising up, before he really took over Germany. Leon Josephson was one of the people who was trying to kill him. So that was the silent partner in this club. And so there's much rumor, and probably it's true, that the $5,000 or $6,000 Barney had to open the club probably came from the Communist Party. And so many people connected to that place were communists. People who came in were communists. And so did Billie know all of this? Of course she knew all this.
But she was not a communist herself.
At one point in the mid-40s, she gave an interview to a magazine called, or a newspaper magazine called PM, in which she did say that she considered herself a communist on racial issues. Because that's what a lot of people were, many people were sympathetic, particularly African Americans, were sympathetic because the Communist Party of the United States was extremely progressive on racial issues. And that was long before the civil rights movement really started in earnest. And so she did identify with those people who were supporting the Communist Party for that reason. So, of course, the Hoover and the FBI knew what the Josephsons were up to. Both Josephsons ended up in an FBI file of 2,000 pages each. So that's how much they were under surveillance by the FBI. So the fact that Billie worked with him closely for 2 years, and that venue is really what made her famous, and she sang Strange Fruit there for the first time, and that's really what put her on, you know, the map nationally. Of course, she was associated with communists, but she knew it and she didn't care. So, but did that help target her at the beginning with the government? Sure.
It added to her list.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there were, you know, the whole point of Cafe Society was the first integrated nightclub in America. Barney Josephson had been up to the clubs in Harlem. You go up to Cotton Club. Believe it or not, the Cotton Club, while famous for its black entertainers, it was segregated. So the main floor would be white audience, and there would be black folks in the audience, but they'd be, you know, sectioned off either in the back or in the balcony. Well, he went, this is nonsense. I want to open a club where the audience is segregated and the entertainment is, the talent is segregated, is integrated. So that's what he did. So there were black and white entertainers on the stage and black and white patrons in the audience, all mixed up together. Just doing that made them controversial. They immediately became a target of the New York City Police Department because of that. So Billie would leave at work at night with Jack Guilford, who was the MC, and they would regularly see all the policemen watching them, you know, leave the club.
Because of the communist affiliation.
Because of the racial aspect of it at first. At first. The Hoover boys were more interested because of the communist connection. So they were offending people on two fronts, you know, both because of the racial breakthroughs that they were making and because of the communist connections.
And Billie never escaped that kind of target. I mean, she was always a target.
No, always a target.
She was always being watched or surveyed or questioned.
Well, and one of the interesting facts about this story is that when the Rosenbergs were executed in 1953, no one wanted to adopt their two boys, so they were adopted by Abel Maripol, who wrote Strange Fruit. So in 1953, not only did she have all the racial history, the communist history, but then she was directly connected to the Rosenberg case because Abel had written her most famous song.
Though at one point in the book you say she claimed she wrote it.
Well, she often claimed that she wrote it until he finally put his foot down, wrote a letter to the Times, and said, no, I wrote the music and I wrote the words. And so she finally admitted, and she would, when introducing the song, she would say that, here's a song written especially for me, which was also not true.
Also not true.
Also not true.
I was talking of racial issues, and we'll end this interview with this question. You were writing about a woman of color.
Right.
You are not.
I'm not a woman of color, yes.
Because we were going, in 2020, we were going through a period of intense racial reckoning and what was called cultural appropriation.
Right.
Did you have any pause?
I had nothing but.
You had nothing but pause?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm not. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm always thinking about race, I mean, that's where I remember the marches when I was growing up in Birmingham.
But did you think that the book might be attacked?
Yes.
Because you were invading territory that
Yes.
you ought not have done?
Yes, I expected that.
You expect, but it hasn't happened.
It did
has
not happen, no.
It did not?
No, and it's this is really in the weeds, but part of the reason why I was happy that the editor who bought my proposal was Errol McDonald, is because he's probably the most well-known and respected African-American editor in the business. So when he made the offer, he was like, right out of the gate, I said, I don't care about anybody else. If Errol wants to do it, because I felt like he would be, if I wrote a paragraph that was off, he would know it. If I went down a road that was going to be, not racially sensitive enough, Errol would know it. And so I had that as protection all along.
Okay, that's an important point.
Hugely important. And I'm glad he bought it, and he ended up being the perfect editor for this book. I mean, he just couldn't have been better. And also, he's a great editor. He gave me notes about changing the narrative that were just invaluable. And then, though, when I went on a book tour, I expected it to be brought up, and you're like one of the first people to bring it up. People just
didn't bring it up as an issue. I think we're more relaxed now. Had the book come out in 2020 or 2021, it would have been brought up.
I think so.
But we're a little bit more relaxed now.
I think there are some pockets still within, particularly the literary community or the publishing community, that has stood off a bit because I'm white, writing about a black figure. I think it's an issue, though, and I expected it to be a much bigger issue than it has ended up being. I'm happy to say.
Yes,
It hasn't been.
but it didn't stop you from completing the book.
No, because I thought finally, I can certainly, I can take the information of her life and process it as best I can. Like I said, I grew up in a culture, when you grow up in Birmingham in the 60s, you're very much aware of race. I was on the other side of my family on those issues. So I knew, the various landmines that were out there and was hoping to avoid them. What I wanted to do with her was to paint a positive, understanding, sympathetic portrait of this artist who happened to be a black woman.
And that's what you've done. That's what you've done. I urge you, the book will be available and Paul will sign it. I urge you to buy a copy. It's a first-rate biography.
Thank you, Foster.
Beautifully written.
Thank you.